Welcome to Expeditions in Light. Let's take another expedition with a simple egg. What does this do? Well, it's an exercise in light. Whatever lights you have, you try and figure out what shadows are and how they operate with all your lights and modifiers. To get this egg to stand up, used a little blue tack on the back, put it here, and set it up over there. The camera settings here, ISO 200, shutter speed of 200, and the white balance is set to flash. The aperture is set to f8. I will tell you the pieces of this equipment in the show notes, so do check that out. But for now, let's try and get some pictures. So, of course, we can use the light meter to find out our correct exposure. So how do you know that you're ready to take a flash photography? Flash photography is all about the exposure for the camera settings and the exposure for the light. So let's turn off the flash and take a picture. Here we can tell we are ready for this photography session, because when we take a picture without flash, we get darkness. That means that we control all the light in the situation. Let's go back. Let's put on our flash. I am in full manual mode on the flash, not TTL. In the studio setting, we want to control light. Let's double check that again. That seems fine. So we have a plain white background, an egg, and a touch of shadow on the bottom of the egg. Let's see if we can change that shadow just a little bit by moving this. There is no grid on the bottom here. We will double check our light again. It probably is not moved because we're still pretty close to where the light is. But our shadow has moved. Now we get more shadow on the front. From the original picture, of course, we're pushing more light towards the back. Let's push a whole bunch of light towards the back, shall we? Move that over and see what we get. Now we've dropped a little bit more shadow into that egg, but just a touch. So let's move this back and we'll point it up a little bit and back. Just like that. Let's check our exposure again. Oh, we've had a drop. So we go up a touch. Do note that this focus is a manual focus. We have a static subject, so we don't need to be moving around with autofocus. Here you can see the front turns a bit more white. Of course, we moved in close. We've gained more power because we moved in close. All right, that's close enough. Not too much difference from. So we could go with the grid and a couple other things to try and get things going here, but we do have other modifiers, so let's move on. Okay, so now we're set up with a larger box, which is a 12 by 55 angular box. We do have on here a grid. The grid's gonna narrow that beam of light, but not really make it smaller, but to make sure that we tuck it in and only appear in certain places. Let's get some exposure here. I'm gonna have to pause that up. The grid will take down your power just a little bit. So I'm assuming that you lose some that way. That's close enough. Let's see what that gets us. So now we have about what we had for the shadow before with the Octabox. But now with this square softbox, we're getting a little line towards the back there. Let's see if we can get a line towards the front just by lighting the back only. Now we got more of a shadow up front. On the front of the egg. Doesn't get so much of a line. Let's see if I can go further back. Now I've got a lot more shadow because I'm just pushing the light towards the back. It tells you something about grids, square long soft boxes, and light and how you can control that. Let's do the reverse. I'm going to pull up front here quite a bit and do the same picture. Now we have a heavy line in back. So about the same for the front of the egg. But from there, we can see that. So we want to try more. We want to try more. We could move this around, but I think we've got lots of modifiers to go through. So let's do that. So here we have a very small modifier on a bare bone. The last two before were also on a bare bone. And again, I'll put that in the show notes. Let's get a reading here. Pretty directed modifier, so it's going to be fairly powerful. It's about right where we want it. Let's take a picture and see what we get. So we have a touch more shadow. We started seeing shadow in back because small modifier, we can't push light everywhere. Well, let's see if we can light up the back a bit. Go like this. So we've gotten a little bit more even in light, but because of the small size of the modifier, we have a little bit sharper shadow than the big modifiers, the octabox and the square box. Let's see what happens when we completely isolate the hopefully that'll stay there. We moved, isolated, and got into heavy shadow. All we did was move the modifier and the light. We didn't change anything about the power. See how our light is. We could drop that a little. Check and make sure we're firing. We're firing. A little bit further over. Pretty close to right over the edge. Again, this is not about being perfect. This is about testing and learning and finding where you are. Very bright light. Because of course this modifier is just pushing the light forward. There's no filtering on this at all. So we're going to have to drop quite a bit just to get something usable. Close enough. So here we have hard shadows. We don't have any of that dispersion that will happen with these soft boxes. We just have a hard egg and a hard shadow. Let's move that over and let's see if we can make that shadow do some other things. Try that there. Yeah. So now we push the shadow towards the back, of course, because our light modifier is pushing that way. That does mean that if we take all that light and way back and fire, we should get a nice dark shadow. So this controls the light all the way into that. We can even go down further by modifying this light with a grid. Let's see if we can go back to that first shot area. with this. Anyway. There it comes. Yeah. Since we put a grid on, we should lose some light. So let's see, we lost a little. It's close enough for this. Now we can see super hard shadows in the back, still that hard shadow on the egg, and lots of isolation there because of that hard shadow. Really moody in that lighting situation. Let's point away and see if I can get just the light behind it. Egg's almost completely in shadow, and we're pushing the light behind. Let's try another concept here. So again, we have a very focused light coming from one direction. Still got that grid. Power seems about okay. Let's see what we get. We push the shadow off to this direction. We've got a lot of darkness in our backdrop, which is black, even though the backdrop, as you can see, is white. So these are all good experiments. These are all good experiments to understand. What does this look like? Let's pop another one on here. Let's try the bevel. There it comes. This should be about good enough for that one. We've got a small ball pretty close to the object. And of course, we're going to get that back line. Let's try to add a modifier to that. The round dispersion head. Hopefully I don't get any flare, but we will see. Little drop, but now we have grayish in back instead of just black. Let's try and get this more isolated. We'll go for some barn doors. Pretty heavy attachments. Now we've got just a sliver on all sides. I'm going to try just a little tighter. That. Now we have shadow in front, shadow in back, hard shadow under the egg. Let's see how small I can get that. I've added the grid, and we'll see. We'll probably lose some power, so let's check our power. I was able to focus that in just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. With the same idea in mind, let's go from barn doors, keep the grid, and add a snoot. So I'm looking for just a spot right there. Let's just go for it. Not worry about the light. We could, of course, make that, center that and stuff, but that's just the experiment for now. Let's take and use the bounce card. So I'm trying to make sure there's almost nothing in front. Let's check our power again. A little high. It's close enough. Now we have that front shadow and a little bit more gradient in back. We'll probably even push that harder. Move that around. So that's kind of a rounded object as far as blocking goes and sending the light that way. We can make that different with a different type of flag, but that's an example of the AD200 with the round head. We go with the direct speed light. What type of light do we get with the direct speed light? It's good enough for this one. Let's see. Very harsh light, kind of uneven. Reason why people don't like speed lights too much. Let's try and make that more even. So the magmod series, I have, of course, the magnetic on the front. We would expect a small drop in light. Okay, good enough for this test. So we got evenness, but notice we still got fairly hard in the egg shadow. The magmod is good at spreading, but it's still not a large light source, which is what we need for the idea of soft light. Soft light usually comes from soft light usually comes from large light sources. Let's try the grid. See what we get there. Again, our lights changing. That will probably work. Well, we get nice isolation. That grid on the magmod seems to work quite well to isolate the subject. Basically almost as good as that snoot. So interesting. The idea of spreading out light, let's try that idea. We are reasonably close, so we'll just see what that gives us. That gives us a lot of spread. We still have a fairly hard light underneath the egg, but we have a fairly even spread across. I do like this bounce modifier. It does quite a bit. We're going to do one thing though with the bounce modifier. When we talk about bounce light, we can bounce it off the ceiling. I have changed the location quite a bit. So my power is going to go crazy, but there we are. No modifier, but I've painted this ceiling white on purpose to use it as bounce constantly. So let's see what happens. The interesting thing about the bounce for me is we get very close to the original of the large modifier. This was just an expedition. You have your equipment, you have your room, you have your space. Go and test, find an object. Could be an egg, could be a doll, could be anything else. But something you can isolate against a simple background and take all your lighting and test. What shadows do you get? What highlights do you get? How can you control them? What does each of your modifiers do? How do they look? What is bounce light? Again, thanks for joining me on this expedition. I'm your host, John. Thanks for dropping by. Come around the next time for the next expeditions in light. Thank you.